Hi everyone, I'm Shaylin here with Reedsy. So today we're going to be looking at the costs of self-publishing a book. Cost is something very important to consider as a self-published author. The benefits of self-publishing, like being able to publish on your own schedule and with full creative control, comes at the cost of, well, having to manage all of the costs of your book's production. Self-publishing a book will usually run you somewhere between $500 and around $5,000 US, but of course there are so many factors that impact those costs. This will depend on various factors like your book's length, the level of experience of the professionals you're working with, and the specific services that you require. The figures that I'm going to be showing you in this video are averages from over 20,000 freelance publishing professionals, but of course there are always cases where people are able to find more cost-effective alternatives. For example, working with friends or DIYing some aspect. But if you're hiring experienced professionals for all these different aspects of the publishing process, these are around the cost that you can anticipate. If you want more detail, you can look at our 2022 Costs of Self-Publishing report, which I've linked in the description. Now, the most substantive cost behind self-publishing a book is going to be your editing costs. The main factors that affect the costs of book editing are the book's length, since most editors charge by word, the genre, since some genres such as historical fiction cost more due to things like fact-checking, the types of editing services, since there are multiple different types of editing and most authors will use a combination of them, how clean the manuscript is. If the book requires very substantial revisions, then you may need to go through extra rounds of editing in order to get the book to a fully polished and finished state, and the editor's level of experience. Of course, a newer professional will charge much less than someone who has a decade of experience in the industry. Like with most things, you probably want to find a happy medium. Of course, if you can afford it and you want to work with someone extremely experienced, that's fantastic, but you probably don't want to work with, a freelance editor who's still in high school and able to charge next to nothing because they pretty much have no experience. Now, what about the types of editing? Different types of editing have very different costs associated with them. So first of all is the editorial assessment. You can kind of think of this as a developmental edit light. This is a cost-effective step for authors who are in the early stage of rewrites and feel like they need a professional's eye. It's definitely not a mandatory step, and plenty of authors don't go through an editorial assessment. If you're in the early stages of revision and you feel like you need some help and some guidance, it's probably not worth going through a full developmental edit, since that is the most expensive type of editing, and at this stage your book needs so much work that you could do on your own or with a less expensive form of editing. So this is where the editorial assessment comes in. It's a lighter form of developmental edit. An editor will read and analyze your manuscript and provide suggestions about the story, the structure, where the book fits into the market, and other general suggestions to guide your rewrites. They usually won't make any kind of inline comments, but they'll provide you with an edit letter. Next up is developmental editing. This is a large-scale structural edit meant for authors who've done a full round of self-editing and are ready to really tighten the character, plot, and story aspect. A developmental edit includes everything that you would get from an editorial assessment, and then much more as well. You will get suggestions on big picture concerns like plot, structure, pacing, theme, style, as well as specific guidance on elements of writing craft and inline comments as well. Developmental editing is the most intensive form of editing and therefore the most expensive as well. Next up is copy editing. This is fine-tuning of your manuscript that looks at the sentence level. So a copy editor won't make any suggestions regarding character or storyline, but they'll help you refine your sentences, enhance your word choice, eliminate things like purple prose, repetitive word choice, or awkward sentences, as well as correct spelling and grammar. And finally is proofreading. This is the final stage of editing and is meant to ensure a perfectly clean manuscript. A proofreader reads for any remaining punctuation, grammatical, or spelling mistakes, as well as any formatting errors. They'll also make sure everything is consistently formatted to the chosen style guide. Most writers, and by that I mean pretty much every writer, will need a developmental edit, and most will also require some combination of copy editing or proofreading, often both. For a 60,000 word manuscript, your total editing costs are usually going to be somewhere between $2,400 and $3,400 US, but of course that depends on so many many factors. For example, here is the breakdown estimate for a 60,000 word romance novel. Since these things vary depending on genre and word count, we've got an editing pricing calculator where you can plug in your genre and your word count and get an estimate for your editing costs, since there are so many factors involved. So I'll leave a link to that in the description. Editing will almost certainly be the largest cost, but it is also one of, if not the most important, because it ensures you're publishing a quality, polished manuscript. Next up is cover design. Now, cover design is usually impacted by the following factors. First of all, the designer's experience. Just like with editing, a more experienced designer will charge more than a less experienced designer. Novice designers might charge between $300 and $500 per project, whereas more experienced designers might charge more around $800. The cost can also be impacted by the style and the complexity of the design. An elaborate illustrated cover is going to cost quite a bit more than something just based around manipulating stock images. If you want to save on a cover cost, the most cost-effective style of cover is a stock image-based cover. Covers requiring illustrations or a custom photo shoot will have much higher costs because they require a lot more time. Cost might be also impacted by the number of rounds of revisions that you want to the cover. Now, most cover designers are going to be happy to make small tweaks to the design, but if you want extremely large revisions to the design or an entirely different design, that's going to incur some extra costs. And finally, the cover format. If you're only designing a cover for an ebook file format, then you just need the front cover. But if you're designing for print, you also need a design for a front cover, a spine, and a back jacket. And if it's a hardcover with a dust jacket, then you're also going to need design for the inside and outside flaps. Now, most people publish a combination of formats, but if you are only publishing ebook, then you will have lower cover costs. Around 60% of cover design costs are under $750. So if you set that as your budget, you should be able to get a quality cover. Next up is formatting. Now, formatting can run you between $250 and $750, but for a lot of writers, it can also, and probably should be, free. More and more self-published authors are formatting their books themselves. There are tons of tools out there. We've even got one, the Reedsy book editor, which exports directly to ebook file formats. So for most books that just require standard formatting, you can totally DIY this and save yourself a lot of money. But certain books require more intensive formatting. If you have a lot of images, a lot of graphic, tables, charts, or just any kind of more complex design elements, then you will probably want to hire a professional formatter. You can usually format novels, memoirs, short story collections, poetry collections, or nonfiction books that don't require any graphic elements on your own. But for cookbooks, picture book, or educational nonfiction with a lot of charts or graphics, you'll probably want to hire a professional formatter. If you do want to hire a professional, these are the factors that can affect the cost. As always, the level of experience. Like with everything, a more experienced professional is going to charge more. The manuscript length, longer manuscripts take longer to format and also longer to comb over to make sure there are no mistakes. And finally, how graphically intense the project is. Formatting a cookbook is very graphically intensive. You have tons of images and different text elements that all need to flow and work together on every single page. So even though it may be shorter than a novel, it will cost more to format because the project is so much more graphically intense. Now, those are the main costs, but there are a few extra costs that can also crop up. It's good to be aware of them. First of all is editorial reviews. This is when you submit your book in order to receive an editorial review before the book is published, ensuring you have high quality reviews and blurbs that you can use to promote your book before the publication date. We have an editorial review platform called Reedsy Discovery, which is meant for indie authors, and the cost to submit is $50. So these kinds of costs are nothing compared to your editing and design costs, but these little extra costs can start to add up, so it's good to be mindful of them from the beginning. Next up would be ads. A lot of indie authors make use of ads to sell their books. If you want to experiment with ads in order to reach new audiences, we've got courses on both Facebook and Amazon ads that I'll leave a link to in the description. Costs for Facebook ads are about $5 a day to get started, so it's fairly cost effective to test run, and you can start to scale up your budget once you start seeing results. Next up would be price promotions. Now, running a price promotion where you discount your book in order to drum up buzz, get more sales, and climb the sales ranks is free, but you need to make sure that people know about it. You can pay for listings on free or discount book sites in order to promote your book while it's under price promotion. Promotion slots can range from $15 to $120 depending on the size of the site and how competitive your genre is. We've got a video on price promotions linked below if that's a marketing strategy that you're interested in. Another potential cost is hiring a marketing expert. If you just don't have a strong grasp of marketing, a book marketer can do things like help optimize optimize your book's metadata, set up ad campaigns, set up a mailing list, and teach you how to maintain these things. It isn't a necessary cost by any means, but if you feel out of depth with marketing, then it is a good option. Another potential cost is ISBNs. The cost of ISBNs depends on where you live. For example, in Canada, they're actually free, but typically you can save money by buying them in bulk. So if you know you're going to go on to publish multiple books or multiple editions, instead of just buying one ISBN individually, you can buy a bunch of them. So for example, in the US, one ISBN costs $125, but 10 ISBNs cost $575. Another upfront cost to be aware of is the cost of physical books that you may order to keep on hand for things like events. The key here is just not to overshoot and end up ordering way more copies than you can reasonably sell. You don't need a whole garage full of them, but it is good to have a few physical copies on hand. Ordering copies of your own book will be much cheaper than buying them at retail price because you're only paying for the printing and production costs. So if you sell them at events, you can of course make a good profit, but you don't want to overshoot by ordering way more copies than you can sell initially. In the end, every book and every author has unique publishing needs, so it's impossible to give an exact quote on the costs of self-publishing. So look at these different factors, decide on what your priorities are, and from there you can start to estimate your budget. As you actually research the freelancers that you're going to work with, you'll be able to zero in on a more accurate cost. We have some related videos on how to save money on self-publishing, as well as how to set a self-publishing budget, so I'll leave links to those in the description. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos from us. We've got new writing, editing, and publishing tips every Tuesday and Friday. Until next time, bye!